Why hello, I would like to welcome you to my channel. Today I'm doing a deep dive into this oil pastel resist that I did a video on just recently. There were more questions that I had and I wanted to see if I could answer any of those additional questions. One of them was, can you use distress inks on the Gelli plate and then pull the design, the oil pastel design, from the distress inks? So I just put a gradient color from this antique linen, Spice Marmalade, and Kitsch Flamingo on my plate. Then I'm just going to use my brayer and kind of blend them out and smooth out the color, blend them a little in the center, and then see if this oil pastel resist will work on here. Now, before I pull this resist, I needed to create my oil pastel design, and this time I was going to do a freehand one. So even though I just put my ink on my plate, because distress ink doesn't dry very quickly, I was able to draw this entire design and the distress ink didn't dry at all while I was drawing this. So if this was acrylic paint, my plate would be totally dry by the time I would be applying this. So just be mindful if you're using the acrylic paint, you'll have to have this design created before you apply the paint, but with the distress ink I was able to have plenty of working time to create this while it was on the plate. I'm just doing a speckle design and kind of like paint blobs, or something that would show up bold and something that would show up kind of like in a more detailed look, small finer detail. I'm just pressing this on top of the distress ink and you can see it pulled off a lot of color. And now I'm just taking a blank sheet of paper. This is just copy paper, 24-pound copy paper. And I would say this didn't really work. You can kind of see the little blobs, but it's so faint. Maybe if you did it over and over, but then you'd have to try to line it up perfectly each time. So I wanted to try something else with the distress ink. So I had heard about this from a Facebook group, a community, and it's a mixed media group. And they had mentioned that you could pull a magazine texture, was her example, and then put the distress inks behind the magazine texture that you had put down with acrylic paint, and then use the distress inks behind that. And then you could use like a collage medium or Mod Podge or something to pull up the distress ink. So the thing to remember here is, now that I have acrylic on my plate and I'm going to be adding my distress inks onto the back side of that, distress inks will not pull up acrylic paint. So if I were to just put paper over the top of this after I'm done ink blending, all that would come up is just the distress ink, because the distress ink is not sticky enough to remove the acrylic from the plate. You need something wet and sticky like paint, acrylic, to remove it. So this technique is based on what you put behind it. So the only way to pull up this distress ink and the paint is by putting a sticky ink or substance in the back side here. I'm going to do the matte collage medium for this example. This step is pretty much wasted in this, basically with the distress inks and what I'm going to do next. So I wouldn't recommend doing any texture like this. Lesson learned, because the collage medium is just going to blend all those distress inks back out again. So you don't need to do any kind of texture like that if you're going to be doing a collage medium on top of the distress inks. You do have to be careful too, because number one, I think I used a little bit too much. I wasn't sure how much to use, so I would say that first blob would have been plenty. I wouldn't have needed that second blob or what I pulled off of the knife. So just be mindful of that. Also, I was trying to remember where my lighter color was. It was at the bottom, so I started there and then kind of worked my way up to where the pink was, and I was trying not to blend them too much together. I had to a little bit to pull some of it off just because it was so much. My paper even started sliding when I put my paper down. So this is where, again, I'm just experimenting here. And sometimes I know probably you too, when you hear something that someone tried, but there's not really any instructions on how to do it, I just play around with what sounds like it would work and see if it does. Sometimes it does work and other times it doesn't, but I always have fun, and I typically learn something in these play around processes. So here you can see there's some blobs left on the plate because my collage medium was a little bit too thick, but it did pull up the distress ink. So this is a way that you could use your distress inks, and if you wanted to pull the design, pull it with acrylic first, then put distress ink over the back, and then collage medium. Now, without cleaning my plate, I had added some matte Mod Podge. I wanted to see if this would pick up the rest of the design on the plate. So I just did not re-ink with my distress inks. I didn't do anything else. I just put the matte Mod Podge on, rolled it out smooth. I did a lesser amount than I did with the collage medium. And this one I think turned out even better. It's more like a ghost print of the first one. But for the evenness of it, I think it worked really nice. So I would say the matte Mod Podge to me worked better for this technique. So here they are together after they dried. It did take that collage medium a lot longer to dry, probably because it was thicker. The Mod Podge one was dry pretty quickly. I just get this Mod Podge from Dollar Tree. They have these small sizes, and I like that because they don't dry out as fast. I can't seem to use those big containers before they dry out. So another question I wanted to see if I could answer is, can you use this oil pastel resist texture more than once? So here I had used it on the purple for the last print, and here I'm using it just on top of a coral color that I had put down. There are some spots that the paint didn't come up, but I'd say overall it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. So here I took that texture. It's just a cardstock that I embossed with an embossing folder. This one is like a Paris words, kind of scripty. I just take some design out of those little pieces where the paint was still wet. Then I let the paint dry, and then I'll go in with this kind of minty green color and a light blue color. My green was separating a little bit, and I thought that might affect it, but if you brayer it out nicely and take your time with it, even if you put separated paint on the plate, you can get it to smooth out pretty nicely. I wanted another texture on top, so I just had some burlap lying around, and I just brayered over the top of it. And then we'll see what this print looks like. So again, this would be the print taking a second run at using that same design on another piece. I didn't go over that piece, by the way, with the oil pastel. I did not go over it again with oil pastels. I didn't do anything to that I'm going to call it the resist piece. And here we go. I think it turned out great. I love the colors on this. They're so nice and light, but that coral color really pops off the green and the blue. So I think this was success. 2 uses out of this one piece. What do you think? Here's a little bit closer look after it had dried. It picked up a little bit of that purple that was still on the plate, and I think it looked really nice. So next I'm going to take, these are the pastels I'm using today. I'm using these Artist Loft Pastels. I'm trying to figure out if it matters what color I use to create my resist piece, my design. So in this example, I'm going to use 3 different colors and try to see if I can get any difference at all from how it will remove or resist the paint. I'm starting with, I wanted to do something a little bit more complex, I guess. So I tried doing a word, just like a script. I did Spark Joy. Just wanted to see if that would do a really nice resist. Plus, I wanted to try something with hand lettering. There's so many options with if this works out. There's so many ways that I could use this. It is very difficult with the flat edge of these oil pastels to write over kind of like these smaller lines, but I did pretty good. I mean, I had to keep spinning it and trying to get a sharper spot, but if you have a sharper oil pastel, it would definitely be easier. Then I'm going to use my green and make little stars. And for the yellow, I wanted it to look like sparkles. So I put little sparkles around the words. I wanted to try something a little more complex as well to see if I could have maybe 2 layers of this resist with 2 different designs. So for the first design, it was the words and the stars. For the second design, I did like my little blotches and the little dots, so I decided to hold it up in front of my other piece and just put the splotches and the little dots in the open spaces or the white spaces of the Spark Joy piece. Because I'm using copy paper, I could see through it pretty well. I'm trying to figure out where those yellow pieces are because those were a lot harder to see through. Okay, now that I have both of those pieces done, I'm going to see if it makes a difference what kind of acrylic paint I use. This one is a matte acrylic paint by Folk Art. It's like a midnight navy blue color. I wouldn't say it's chalky, but it does kind of have more of like a chalky consistency than like the glossier ones. One thing that I noticed as I was doing this is I was trying to figure out how thin to go or how thin I could go to pull that resist. So here I'm going fairly thin. Just trying to figure out to line up to get the most of that design on my plate. And I am rubbing it in firmly, so I'm not rubbing it in real light. I'm pressing down very firm, just like I would a regular print. And seeing if it removed that image. It looks like it did a little bit, so it's hard to tell on the plate until you put some paint down. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this print with some pinks and see how that looks. Okay, I would say this one's a fail. You can't really read it. It's blurry. I think I made my paint too thin for this one. So I wanted to try another print using this same oil pastel design, but this was more intricate than the blotchy one. So I decided to trace over the words with my oil pastel. I'm just using a different color because it really doesn't matter what color you're using. It's just how thick the pastel is if it's going to resist the paint. So now I will go in with a lighter color. I'm using a yellow this time. And I'm just going to keep rolling it out until I get a nice smooth coloring, but not going too thin this time. Again, I'm pressing pretty firm. And just lift it up. Now this one, it seemed to work. So I could already tell just by looking at the plate that I could see the words. So I was really excited. I wanted to do something sparkly in the Spark Joy department, so I used my Perfect Pearls. To kind of go with the dots on this, I went with little circles of, since I had a little circular brush, I just dropped little dots on and then I spread them out, and then I just kind of went in with the different colors and did the same thing just to create a little bit of a design with my Perfect Pearls. So if you've never used the Perfect Pearls on the gel plate, it works so great because the plate really holds on to the pearl powders. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know I really love this technique of using the pearls behind some acrylic paint and seeing how much it will show through. I like using a matte acrylic paint when I'm using a technique like this, just because the pearls are going to be so shiny that you almost need a matte paint to kind of offset it a little bit. I do always wipe down my extra pearls off of the plate before I put my paint down. And in this case, because I filled the entire background in with the Perfect Pearls, it really doesn't matter what color paint you put on the outside. I decided to go with this purple, kind of metallic purple color. This way, if I did miss any spots with the Perfect Pearls, the pearl color from this paint would show through. For paint over the Perfect Pearls, you don't want to have a very, very thick layer, but you also don't want to have it too thin. It has to still be wet. So that's the tricky part, is not going so thin that it starts drying out before you put your paper on, but also not having it too thick. I'm just using that same piece that I had messed up on. Since I didn't like that, instead of wasting the paper, I'm just going to pull this print right on top of it. I'm going to let this rest on the plate for a little bit before I remove it. Anytime I do Perfect Pearls on the plate, I always have remnants left on the plate. So depending on, I guess, how heavy your paint was on top of it to pull the print, you get different amounts left over on the plate. So this is very shiny. It turned out really nice, and you can see from that matte acrylic paint, if I kind of put it in the shadows, you could see the yellow more, but then when I put it in the light, you can see the colors behind it more. It doesn't pop off quite as much as like using a black, but I still think if you're trying to use this technique, it does work, so you might just play with the colors. So now I'm going to use just some black over the top. This is after I'd done the perfect pearls, I had not cleaned my plate, but just putting black right on top. And then that second piece that I had made, the kind of like the in-between design that should go around the words, I'm going to pull that from my plate. This worked really nice. This black color works great and removed the paint really nicely. While that's still wet, I'm taking that same pearl piece that I just made and just lining it up and pressing it down while the paint is still wet. But the paint did start to dry a little bit at this point, so it's not going to be a perfect peel. There'll be some paint left on the plate, and that'll be okay because I can put that into my next piece. So here you can see I could probably go back and do the same thing with the Spark Joy on this one and do another layer, but I'm going to call this one done. I like how it looks and I don't want to ruin it by overdoing it. So I'm going to overdo it on the next one instead. So let's see what overdoing it looks like. In this case with the perfect pearls, if you don't like all that shine on there, maybe you prefer the acrylics or just the matte coloring, this next print will be more of the matte. So I took what was left on my plate and I did the coral color, kind of like a peach color, and a kind of like a violet pinky color, and I just blended those two out. And once I was happy with how those were blended, I went ahead and took that texture piece again, and I'm just gonna put some design interest into this background. I'm just touching lightly in the center so that I don't get those harsh lines. Then I've got this thick bubble wrap, a little bit thicker. It's not the thickest kind, but it's not the really tiny ones. So I'm putting that in that open space. And then I'm going to pull this print, and this will be my base layer. And I'm going to build on top of this layer and see what effects I can get if I do the Spark Joy on top of this print. Okay, so I like this. I get a little bit of the white in the background. I get the black from the texture that was left on there, the bubbles. So I'm liking what this looks like. Now I want to build up with a gray color first. I'm trying to go for like a shadow, so where you have a gray shadow until you get to like the bold text. So my idea here is start with the lighter gray. I did use a blow dryer on this Spark Joy piece just so that the paint left on there wasn't wet anymore. And I was hoping to reactivate maybe those pastels because they're oil. And so I figured the heat might make them work a little bit better just in case there was any issue. Some of the areas the paint wasn't pulling up as much, so I kept putting it back down to see if I could remove a little bit more of it. But I wasn't too concerned about just a little bit extra. I used the side of my paper to pull some of those pieces up. Now I'm just going to line up my pink and coral piece and see if I can get anything to pull up. I'm trying to work fast here so that my paint doesn't dry to the plate before I pull this. Otherwise I'd have to use something on top of it to pull it, like the matte medium or the Mod Podge. So it's very light. I wanted to see if I can layer up on top of this. And again, keep in mind the Oil Pastel Resist design. I used it once for the blue, the navy blue, once for the yellow. Then I used it just now for the gray. Now this is a metallic gray, so I'm going to use it for that one. Okay, so pulling away this metallic color, I couldn't really tell if this was going to transfer any of the words, so I just went ahead and lined my pink and orange paper back up on the plate and pressed down to see what it would look like. So here's our next layer. And it's got some of the blobs kind of in different areas, and you can kind of see the spark joy, but it's still kind of light. So I want to add one more layer with the black. So with this layer, this will be my 5th layer that I'll be using on the Oil Pastel Resist design. So I only redid the words that one time, so with that darker blue, and then I heated it the one time, but then after that, these last 3 prints, I think, I didn't do anything except let the plate or let the little piece dry so that there wasn't any wet paint on it. And again, this black, I'm having a really good pull with the black, so that one's working for me. It is a matte black. Now, because it was fairly thin, some of the design started drying before I got to put my paper on there, even though I was working pretty quickly. So as I pulled it up, you can see where the S is. It didn't pull up fully. What I could have done was put the matte Mod Podge on my plate and then pulled the design again, and it would have all been there, but I just decided to leave it like this. I was able to see it pretty well. I thought it looked really cool, and I can totally see this working for different designs. I did have it offset a little, so it looks like it has a shadow. So I think that worked out. Next, I wanted to see if I could use these alcohol inks on my plate and then pull that Oil Pastel Resist piece to create a design with these fast drying inks. So the trick with these, I didn't end up using any alcohol, and I also didn't use any blending solution. I just used the little foam felt tip and just blended out my colors on the plate. I'm trying to keep them fairly wet, so I was going over the parts that dried, and then while it's wet is when you want to pull that design. So this is a reused design. I'd already used it before. Now I'm going to let my plate dry, and then I'm just going to go in with a light color over the top. I did use a little bit too much paint, so you do want a thin, even layer of paint to pull your alcohol inks up. Since it was fairly thick, I went ahead and pulled a texture. This is actually shelf liner, so it's kind of squishy. I just used my brayer to kind of press it in. This is a blank piece of paper. And I'm going to rub that in really well and let that dry a little bit to the plate before I remove it. All right, so you can see the designs in this. The ones on the middle are harder to see, but the bottom was easier to see, and the top. It's not perfect, but I would say this worked. I like it. I think I would definitely try more techniques like this with the Oil Pastel Resist on alcohol inks. Tricky thing though is just remembering that they dry quickly, so you have to work fast. But other than that, I think that I learned a lot from this kind of playing around. I learned that you can layer up and use different colors to build the layers. I learned that you can use the distress inks. You just want to use maybe the matte medium or the Mod Podge on the background. Alcohol inks work as well for the perfect pearls. Those make a splash of color and very vibrant. But then you can also layer a different design on top of your print. So I learned so many things just from playing around with this, and I really like how these prints turned out. Gives me some more ideas to try out, and I hope you try something like this. The nice thing is you can create whatever design you want, as long as you can transfer it with your oil pastels. So the options are limitless in just your creativity. So I hope you enjoyed this technique and kind of deep dive into the Oil Pastel Resist technique. And please like this video if you learned something from it, and I hope to see you in the next video.